everyone. Welcome to What Does the Bible Teach with Pastor Joshua Olivarez. I am Jamie, and in today's episode, we will be continuing our discussion in Matthew chapter 24 with What is the abomination of desolation? What is the great tribulation mentioned in verse 21? And are we living in the tribulation that is spoken of in this chapter? Also, who is the elect that is mentioned here? Is it referring to the church or the Jewish nation of Israel? So, without further ado, Pastor Josh, what does the Bible teach?
Thank you, Jamie. The Bible teaches us in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." As I repeat again, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Now, the expression of abomination of desolation occurs 4 times in the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 8, starting at verse 13, it teaches us, "Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot?" Then in Daniel chapter 9, starting at verse 27, "And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate." Then in Daniel chapter 11, starting at verse 31, "Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation." And lastly, in Daniel chapter 12, starting at verse 11, "From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Now, when the word abomination is used in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, it is used when speaking about homosexuality. And in Leviticus chapter 18, starting at verse 22, the Bible teaches us, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind, as with womankind. It is abomination." And this word was also used when speaking about certain animals that were forbidden to the Jews to eat, which is found in Leviticus chapter 11. And lastly, when abomination is used, it speaks of idolatry. And in Deuteronomy chapter 7, starting at verse 25 and 26, the Bible teaches us, "The graven images of their gods you are to burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, nor take it for yourselves, or you'll be snared by it. For it is an abomination to the Lord your God. You shall not bring an abomination into your house, and like it come under the ban. You shall utterly detest it, and you shall utterly abhor it, for it is something banned." Then in Jeremiah chapter 32, starting at verse 35, the Bible teaches us, "They built the high places of Baal that are in the valley of Ben Hinnom, to cast their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech, which I had not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind, that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin." So we see in the Bible that when the word abomination is used, it speaks of something that is profane, something that is disgusting, something that is sinful, unholy, and detestable before the Lord. So going back to Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, when Jesus says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Now, in the book of Daniel, there are two figures that are involved in this abomination of desolation. One figure in the past, and one figure that is to come in the future. And this figure in the past, that is known in Jewish history, was a man by the name of Antiochus IV. And Antiochus IV, also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, which means God manifest, was known as a Seleucid king of the Hellenistic Syrian kingdom who reigned from 175 to 164 BC. And he was known by his contemporaries as a madman, to which they gave him the nickname Epimanes, which means the mad one or the madman. And he definitely demonstrated his madness when he invaded Jerusalem on December 16 of 168 BC, where he conducted a massacre in which 80,000 men, women, and children were killed. And this is recorded in 2 Maccabees chapter 5, verse 11 to 14. He also desecrated the temple on that day by erecting an altar to Zeus over the altar of burnt offering and sacrificed a swine on it, and tried to Hellenize the Jews by making the practice of Judaism a capital offense. So the abomination that Antiochus committed in the past by desecrating the Jewish temple and making it desolate would be a foreshadow of what the Antichrist is going to do in the future, in the Great Tribulation period. And that is why Jesus said in verse 15 of Matthew 24, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place," which is a reference to a third Jewish temple that is going to be built in the tribulation period, let the reader understand. So what has happened in the past is also going to happen in the future. So let's compare the historical figure Antiochus Epiphanes with the future world dictator, the Antichrist, and let us see what they have in common. In 167 BC, according to 2 Maccabees chapter 5, verse 11 to 14, Antiochus Epiphanes invaded Jerusalem. He also stopped sacrifices and worship in the temple, which is recorded in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 41 to 54. He also killed those who would not obey him, which is found in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 50. He also claimed to be deity and built a shrine for Zeus in the temple, which is found in 2 Maccabees chapter 6, verse 2. Now, the Antichrist, on the other hand, is going to invade Jerusalem, according to Daniel chapter 11, verse 41. He will also stop sacrifices and offerings in the temple, which is found in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. He will kill those who do not worship him, recorded in Revelation chapter 13, verses 4 and 15. And lastly, as Antiochus claimed to be deity and built a shrine for another god in the temple, likewise, the Antichrist will claim himself as God, and he will build his own image. Now, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, the Bible teaches us, "Who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God." Then in Daniel chapter 11, starting at verse 36, "Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all." So the question earlier, what is the abomination of desolation? The abomination of desolation is when the Antichrist, during the middle of the 7-year Great Tribulation, is going to invade Jerusalem. He will turn against Israel. He will infiltrate the Jewish temple. He is going to blaspheme it. He will profane it. He will exalt himself as the only God. He will deny God. He will defy God. He will fight against God and blaspheme God. But the very end of the Antichrist is going to be destruction, because the Bible teaches us in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, "Then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming." And that is the abomination of desolation. And as we answer the rest of the other questions for tomorrow morning, if you have any questions concerning about today's episode or questions in the Bible, kindly let us know, and we will do what we can to answer your questions on this podcast. What does the Bible teach? This is Pastor Joshua Olivarez, just wanting to gladly remind you that Jesus Christ is God.